Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. So today, where are we at the moment? Today is Wednesday. We've done the webinar on Monday, which was all about sourcing online. Did the webinar yesterday, which was all about commercial conversions, and that was mainly sourcing online and how many leads that can create for you. I would suggest that you've probably got well over 40, possibly even 50 leads from the three sources that we've talked about. There were two sources from online sourcing, and then the different strategy of commercial conversion. So I think we're already well ahead after a couple of days of finding those 30 deals in 5 days, which is what the Facebook group is named as. Now, if you have been watching the webinars, please go across to the Facebook group, register in the Facebook group. If you've got any questions, please put them in that Facebook group. We'd be happy to answer all of the questions that you have in there. You guys can also, you might bump into somebody else on that group that's sourcing somewhere in your area. Might be a great way of you to hook up with other sources and just to expand your network, So I would highly recommend that you get in there. Now, what are we going to look at today? We're going to look at direct to vendor. So we've talked about online sourcing for standard flips and title splits, which is what we did on Monday. Yesterday was about commercial conversions. Direct to vendor is something that you can apply to almost all kinds of property strategies. So just a quick reminder, we're sourced. We have a lot of stuff going on in property. We've got developments, we've got investments, or the property side of the business, which is where our franchisees can put their deals onto our website. We've got the capital side where we raise money for our franchisees to do their deals. And we've got the franchise where we train people in order to make money out of property. And in the last 18 months, like we've said before, we've grown lots and lots and lots of businesses. So let's have a look at what we've covered so far. So at the end of today, we will have covered direct to vendor leads and how your network can provide you with leads that previously you might not have thought were there. So we've got 2 more days after today. We've got packaging your deals, which we're going to cover tomorrow on Thursday. And then we've got investor lead generation, which we're going to cover on Friday. So from beginning to end, at the end of this week, you'll have all the information that you need in order to start or grow your property sourcing business. If you don't want to grow a property sourcing business, then you will have enough tips and advice in order to facilitate whatever you are trying to achieve out of property. Because remember, on day 1, we said the thing that you need to have before you start sourcing is a goal. You need to come up with your 12-month goal, and I provided you with a template for that. Got loads of response for people that wanted a copy of that template, so I can only assume that they're putting that in place and building their business the right way, and not just finding out little snippets of information here and there and trying to put that in place without a coherent plan of how you're going to grow your business. So without further ado, let's get on with direct to vendor. So, as we talked about on Monday as well, 95% of sales are through estate agents. So why would you even bother going for those direct to vendor sales? Because presumably, by going direct to vendor, you're only targeting those additional 5%, right, to make it up to 100%. Well, that's not always the case. If you think about some specific strategies, you might want to circumvent the agent. You might not want to go through that agent at all, because shock horror, not all estate agents are that helpful in all deals. And the best example of that I can think of is rent to rent. So on rent to rent, when you're proposing a deal, the worst thing that you can possibly do is pick up the phone to that agent and try and explain to them exactly what rent to rent is. Because for anybody that's been on any of my training will be able to tell you that their barriers are way up when they're on the phone. They are not listening to you at all because they've got 100 other things going on. So if you do try to pitch to that agent, the likelihood of them accepting your rent to rent proposal, pretty low. So I would say I went through 6 months when I first started to put rent to rent into practice. I went through 6 months of failing and failing and failing and then failing and failing until I came up with the perfect strategy for deploying rent to rent, but going through the agent. Now, I'd say I probably talked to, I don't know, lots and lots of agents in those 6 months. And because my pitch was incorrect, because I wasn't doing the right thing, I actually turned them off. So instead of just them saying no to that individual proposal, they were turned off to me and my business entirely. They were turned off to the whole rent-to-rent proposal. So I know that going through any of those agents for any property that I found in the future wouldn't have worked, because they wouldn't have, they were already a no for any rent-to-rent proposal. So if I did find a rent-to-rent, what I would then have to do is I would then have to go direct to vendor, which makes sense, right? So the agents are definitely not going to work with me. I have to go direct to vendor. So therefore, that's the first reason that you would go direct to vendor. Now, these properties are available through the agent. So immediately, you're not restricting yourself to those 5% of properties that are only available, that aren't going to be controlled by the agent. You've got access to the agent's stock as well, or properties that are in the agent's stock, but obviously you're not going to be going through the agent. So it's not just for properties that aren't marketed by agents. And secondly, you could find properties that are not on the market. So the best example of that strategy would be a rundown house. And now these are the kind of properties that you wouldn't have noticed. And then as soon as you start doing a little bit of property training, as soon as you start driving around, looking out the car window in a different way, looking for opportunity, your eyes are focused and your brain is focused on finding opportunity, then you see houses like this all over the place. You know the kind of house. The front garden clearly hasn't been managed at all this year, never mind this month. The curtains are always in exactly the same position. They might not have any curtains. And when you look through that window, you can see that there's nothing in there. That property obviously has a story. And it might not be available through estate agents. So historically, the first thing that you might have done is you go onto Rightmove on your phone and you search in the location where you currently are, and you're looking for that property and it doesn't show up. So it's probably not on from agents. So then, therefore, what do you do? Well, we're going to get into that. We're going to get into the strategies. We're going to get into the solutions that this can provide for you. Now, agents provide more deals, however, they are more expensive. This is the fact of rent to rent and going through agents. And agents, and the way that we dealt with this was we made direct to vendor marketing part of the process. So we didn't just think all agents are bad. Agents are going to be a nightmare to go through. So let's just not talk to the agents. Let's avoid those conversations. Because if we'd have been avoiding those conversations, those difficult conversations, and the conversations where people are basically calling you unpleasant names and saying that your business is a sham, and rent to rent is not legal because you're subletting, you know, those kind of conversations. If we'd have been avoiding those conversations, it would have been about self-preservation rather than making a good business choice. So we actually marketed agents first for all of the rent to rents. And then after that marketing, we then made direct to vendor part of the follow-up if the agent said no. So we went to the agent said no, and then instead of that just being the end of it and not having anywhere to go, we would then put them into a direct to vendor funnel, and that they would fall into a different process, and we would then market direct to vendor. And the first 2 deals that I ever got on rent to rent were both direct to vendor once we had tried to market through the agent. Now, there are other strategies that this might apply to. So when you're going direct to vendor, it's not necessarily the case that you will find a strategy and then just go direct to vendor on that strategy and that's all you'll do. It's much more likely that it will form part of a process of initially going out to the agent, and then when the agent either says no or doesn't come off, you then go direct to vendor and you try to communicate directly with the person who is making the decision. So initially, those first 2 rent-to-rents that we brought on board, they were both marketed through the agent. And we went through the agent first. The agent said no. Then we went direct to vendor, and the vendor, both of those vendors agreed to allow us control of those properties for a period of 3 years, both of which properties made over £1,000 per month worth of income, profit. So lease options, rent to buy, subject to anything. This will mainly mainly sort of talk to sort of slightly out of the ordinary strategies where when you try to pitch to an agent, they probably don't understand what you're talking about. Now, agents they do control 95% of the stock, and some agents are absolutely fantastic. You know, they have the same values and beliefs as we do here, where it's all about constant growth, progression, education, learning as much as possible about the industry so that you can implement some of your education into a deal to fit that deal as perfectly as possible and come up with the best solution, because that's what it's all about, right? All about solutions. So something like lease options or rent to buy, you know, slightly out of the ordinary strategies, but not all estate agents have those values and beliefs. A lot of estate agents are just going to be quite happy to understand the conveyancing process as it works and just go down that straightforward conveyancing process with the finance provider being a mortgage provider for the exit. Now, stepping outside of that is stepping outside of a lot of comfort zones for estate agents because they're not familiar with it. And you know estate agents, right? They are positioned, they are pitched as being the local property expert. So as soon as you start challenging that image that they have of themselves of being the local property expert, it can get a little bit uncomfortable, and some agents don't like that at all. So so anything that's slightly out of the ordinary, you might get a fairly chilly response from the estate agent. However, explaining it to the vendor might get you more success. So going direct to vendor on these slightly unusual strategies can be a really good way of getting very strong leads. So property is not on the market, the second one. So why would somebody sell a property? You know, if you've seen one of these properties where the garden hasn't been manicured is maybe going a bit far, hasn't been managed for the whole of this year, but you get in touch with the vendor, why would they sell it? Surely if they were going to sell it, they would already have it on the market. They would have it advertised with a local estate agent, right? Well, you know, that's not always the case, because I've got an example of somebody that I know who put out on social media that they were looking to help people who were having trouble selling their property. And through a friend of a friend, they got a property lead, which they, upon going into that lead and the reasons that they hadn't put that property on the market through an estate agent, it was purely because they were embarrassed. The property wasn't in a great state. It needed a bit of a refurb, and they didn't have the money to do that refurb, but they were embarrassed to take that property onto a high street agent and say, you know, this is my property, this is my investment, this is the best that I can do. Can you please sell that for me? So knowing that my friend could go to them, have a chat about the property, and sell that property for them without it going on the market in a very friendly kind of way, so they didn't have to step outside of their comfort zone, was a real benefit to them. And my friend made almost £20,000 from selling that property for them. It's also worth saying that they were fully aware of the amount of money that my friend was making from doing that deal. Now, we're not going to go into the structure of how that worked. The point that I'm trying to prove to you is that their decision making and the intention behind their decision making. So their decision making was all about embarrassment. So they could have, but there's a lot of different reasons why somebody wouldn't put a property on the market. So they might have inherited it and they need to get around to putting it on the market. They might live in a completely different part of the country and they just haven't had the time to come up, sort it out, let the agent in, give them the keys and all of that kind of stuff. And therefore hassle or embarrassment or a lack of understanding that they could sell their property. And that can happen with situations like negative equity. So there's a lot of reasons that somebody would sell a property if a proposal was put to them, but they haven't actively gone out there to sell the property themselves. They've not taken that situation by the scruff of the neck and made the most out of it themselves. What they're waiting for is a knight in shining armor or a princess in shining armor, if such a thing exists, to come in and help them out with selling their property. So you could also be in the right place at the right time, which can sometimes happen. And your proposal might fall on their doormat on the same day as a letter informing them of a change of their situation falls on their doormat. And all of a sudden they could be in exactly the right place at the right time with a sense of urgency about selling their property. So there are lots of different reasons, and we're going to go through some of those reasons right now. But out of all of those reasons, you know, they're very different pain points, very different reasons, very different intentions behind those people wanting to sell their property. So when you're direct to vendor marketing, you need to have an understanding as to who the person is that you're trying to communicate with, and what their justification for selling that property is, because that's what you need to talk to, and that's how you can group people together in order to make your marketing much more effective. So let's say run down houses in the neighborhood. So let's look at a specific strategy. So what you're looking for is houses that are not on the market, but they are clearly in need of a refurb. So how can you communicate with those people, the people that own those properties? Well, one thing that I do is I've got leaflets in the car. So if I'm driving around, and you know, you might take your kids to play dates, or you might take them to Cubs or something like that, or any kind of sports teams. And on your way to that event, you might see a property every single week, and it's always, you know, the lights are never on, the curtains are always in the same place, the garden's always in the same condition. What can you do? So the most obvious thing to do is to keep leaflets in the car, specifically about taking property off somebody. You know, you're a fast sale agent. You can buy property very quickly in cash. It's going to be a no hassle solution, and you pop that through the door of that property. Now, of course, if the lights are always off and the curtains are always open, the person that owns that property probably doesn't live there. So how else can you get in touch with the person that owns that property? Well, you can use something called Land Registry. So if you go to Land Registry and you type in the postcode and the number of that property, it will tell you who is registered as the owner of that property and what their home address is. So if you find that information, you could then get in contact with the person, wherever they may be in the country, who owns that property. Now, this opens up an opportunity to you, because you could send that person one letter, but thinking about it on another level, if you send them one letter, what are the chances that they actually read it? And what are the chances that you get your communication with them absolutely right? So what I would do in that situation is, if you found a property that's a bit of a state that you need to put some money into, but you think you can get for below market value, I would set up a series of 4 letters. Each one of those letters would be focusing on a slightly different pain point behind why that person might have that property but hasn't put it on the market. And what I would do is I would send one of those letters per week for 4 weeks. So if you can, write these letters out as templates, and then you can put the owner's details into them, and then you can send them off every Wednesday. Let's use Wednesday as an example, for 4 weeks. Now, I think little changes, little things like sending them on Wednesdays makes a difference, because subconsciously, it might not go noticed, but subconsciously, the person that receives that might notice they always receive one of your letters on a Thursday, which again, subconsciously will tell them you are an incredibly organized person. And it might just give you that additional 1% chance that that owner is going to contact you. Now, another thing that you can do, and I don't actually ever remember hearing anybody else talk about this, but you could knock next door and ask next door whether they have contact details for the person that owned this property. Now, I actually did something similar to this when I bought my own property, because my property had been refurbished, and I thought there was an issue with the size of the extension that they'd put on the back. And what I needed to do was I needed to find out what the original property had on the back, because there was a lean-to. And so I knocked on the 3 houses on either side next door to find out exactly what condition the property was in. And I got loads and loads of information. I got the full history about the street, about the people that live on the street, loads of information about that property. Now, on direct to vendor, some people might have chosen to go direct to vendor because they're trying to avoid having a conversation with the estate agent, because they might not have the confidence to feel like that they can carry that conversation with the estate agent. Now, I think you would surprise yourself, and one of the things that I talk about a lot is mindset and putting yourself out of your comfort zone. Obviously, if you knock next door, you've got to have a conversation with somebody who isn't the deal maker, who isn't the person that's making the ultimate decision, but you've got to have a conversation about that property. But then you've got to go to the phone, and you've got to phone that person if you get the telephone number, and have, pitch basically what your idea is straight away to the vendor of the property. Now, I think at that point, having written out the letters that we've suggested that you write out for the land registry strategy, you will already understand exactly what your pitch is and how your pitch can apply to different people in different situations. Now, what you would therefore need to do with that phone call, when you first make that phone call, is find out about what the vendor's situation is. So actually on that phone call, you would attempt to just gather as much information as you can about why the property's in the current state and why they haven't sold it on. So the first thing you would do is ask a lot of questions about the property and about the situation that they're in and whether they had any intention of selling it. And then once you know what their pain points are, you can then address those pain points with the best pitch out of all the reasons that you come up with when you were writing out your 4 letters. So there's a fantastic example of a property that potentially could be sold, hasn't been sold for a while. Windows are in a pretty bad state, garden's in a pretty bad state. I'm not sure whether that car's moved for a while. So there's a great example. Negative equity, going on to the next one. So I'm sure you understand what negative equity is. It's when the value of the property has gone down. So if the person that wanted to sell it sold it, they wouldn't make enough money off selling the property in order to pay off the loan that they'd originally taken out on that property. So let's see if I've given you an example. I don't think I have. So if they bought the property for £80,000, or if they took out a mortgage on the property worth £80,000, let's say it was 100% mortgage. So they bought it for £80,000, they took out a mortgage for £80,000, and in the couple of years since they took out that mortgage of £80,000, it's now, the value of that property has now gone down to £65,000. So including the mortgage payments that they've already paid off, they might still have a mortgage of, let's say, £75,000, £78,000, but they're only ever going to make £65,000. So in order to sell that property, they would also need to pay off the mortgage to the tune of £10,000 to £13,000. So there's an example of negative equity. Now, it's pretty hard to identify an individual house that is in negative equity without getting to know the owners first. So the commonality between houses that are in negative equity would be house price data and local house price data. So what you'd want to do is find out the specific regions, specific neighborhoods where the house prices have gone down significantly. And if you can do that, and you can identify sort of the sort of mid to lower end of the housing spectrum, the kinds of properties that would have taken out 100% mortgages, as well as the value of the properties going down significantly in the last couple of years, then you can use that information and you can target the neighborhood. Now, if you're targeting a neighborhood, going through land registry, and I didn't mention this a couple of minutes ago, but when you go through land registry and you do that search, each time you do that search will cost you £3. If you were going to do £3 on a whole neighborhood, that's a lot of £3, and it would probably be fairly uneconomical fairly quickly. So what you can do in that situation is you could use leaflets instead. So you get your leaflets drawn up saying about and what you're targeting here is negative equity. So you'll be targeting your leaflets based on you might not think you can leave your house, or you want to sell your house but you're stuck with your mortgage. We can find a solution to that, something like that. Now, the branding of your leaflets depends on what you're trying to achieve out of your business. So I'm not going to go into the branding of your leaflets. What we're going to talk about here is the theory behind it. Now, another way, a more common, what's the word I'm looking for? More modern way of making those, or targeting those adverts would be on social media ads. Now, social media has got a huge amount of data when you're creating ad sets, and over the social media platforms, pretty much everyone is on social media, so the chances of them seeing those adverts are pretty good. So what you can do is you can basically create a leaflet but put it as a social media advert, and then you can target specifically who you're looking for that advert to apply to. Now, unlike the leaflets, which are just going to target geographically, your social media ads can also target what kind of job titles people have, and lots of other factors, what other things that they've liked around social media. So you can target very, very specifically based on the information that social media has. Now, getting into that on its own would be a training course that would take a couple of days. And so we're definitely not going to go into that. There's plenty of information out there that you can get on YouTube or other platforms. So if that's something that you want to do, then you can look at some other training. However, what I would say is you need to make sure that you're testing it properly, because it can become quite expensive quite quickly. So there's other geographical factors, such as local newspapers and advertising boards. Now, what I find from these sort of old media types of communication is that they're quite expensive. I've looked at advertising in local newspapers, and it always seems to be fairly expensive, and something that I've shied away from, because I'd much rather spend the same amount of money but on much more targeted, much more specific advert sets, like the kind of thing that you can get in social media. So how do you choose the right method? These are the questions that you need to ask yourself. So who is your target audience? For a property that is not on the market but it's pretty run down, obviously you're targeting one vendor. If you're looking at houses that are in negative equity, you're targeting a whole, you've got a commonality there between a lot of different people, and it's basically that the value of the properties have gone down. So who is your target audience, and do they congregate using similar behaviors, or do they congregate using similar patterns? And in the case of the negative equity, obviously they congregate geographically. In the case of the people that are could potentially have inherited the house and it's a bit run down, they're not going to congregate really. So therefore, you would need to target them directly. So do they congregate? If the answer is no, you need to go down the direct methods of trying to get in touch with that vendor. And they are such as a leaflet directly through the door, the letters through the land registry, or going next door and finding out who they are and their contact details. If they do congregate, then how can you use this information in order to connect with them, e.g. a targeted ad, or geographically, or any other information where you can communicate with a lot of people that are in that situation rather than just one at a time. So these are all some ways that I've come up with to communicate with people who are in property that might want to sell. These are all direct to vendor solutions that might be able to help you out. So you can go with, you could look at doctors' surgeries, you could look at management companies, you could look at auctions, you could go with radio advertising. You might have an empty properties list with your local council. You could go with liquidation companies, letting agents. There's lots and lots and lots of different ways. Which one you choose depends on who you're trying to communicate with and where they hang out. And how do you get in touch with them? So here's just a few examples for you. So how do you choose the right marketing? Think about it from the end consumer. So what are they looking for? what are your brand values and how can you communicate these brand values to them? So what are they looking for? In the case of the rundown house, they're looking to sell that house and they're looking for a lack of hassle. In the case of negative equity, they don't know what they're looking for because they might not be aware that there's a solution to their problem. So you want to communicate your solution to them and let them know that they've got options that they weren't aware of. Now, when you're coming up with your brand and when you're coming up with your brand values that you want to communicate to them, there are a number of online providers for coming up with logos and communicating your brand visually in ways that might be way beyond your skill set. So I've just put a couple of these down for you. So there's Fiverr.com, peopleperhour.com and freelancer.com. I've used Fiverr.com and People Per Hour in the past. I haven't used Freelancer, but I got really great results from People Per Hour. So that might be somewhere that you're looking for. And what I would say is you need to be very, very specific. You need to write a very thorough brief for them in order to make sure that they come up with a solution for you that communicates exactly what you're trying to communicate. So what if you don't have a specific strategy? What if you've gone through property and you know there's stuff out there that you want to encourage as leads that you're going to generate for yourself, but you don't know exactly what you want to target? Because let's face it, coming up with a property strategy can take a little while. It takes us after our 5 days of training, it then takes us another full day in order to create a 12-month strategy. And that's after we've been through an incredibly intense training course. So if you're doing this on your own in your spare time, how do you come up with that strategy? Well, you might not have the necessary information to come up with that to start off with. So what I would suggest is that you absolutely, everybody in property should follow up with these methods of direct to vendor sourcing. So communicating with solicitors, because you're going to create a power team. A lot of people talk about power teams. Solicitors are in your power team. Now, instead of just viewing that solicitor as somebody who's going to help you conveyance a property or help you draw up a lease option or come up with another solution for you, you should be telling that solicitor what you're looking for, because a lot of solicitors will get access to properties before they come on the market. Just this month, we were told of a property in London that was being held with a solicitor, and the person that owns that property, who still lives in that property, would be willing to accept 50% of the market value of that property because they just want out. They want to move out. They've lived in it for years and years and years. They just want to clear off their mortgage, put a certain amount of money in the bank and move on with their lives. Now, that's a phenomenal opportunity. And the reason that franchisee got wind of that opportunity was purely because they had a conversation with that solicitor about the kind of stuff that they were doing and what they were looking for. It's that simple. Also, lending brokers. So you might have a good relationship with the person that sorts out finance, or you might have had a few conversations with somebody who's going to sort out finance for you. Also, saying to them, what I'm looking for is direct to vendor property opportunities. So if you hear of somebody who hasn't put their property on the market, but they are looking to sell, just come to me, send me over that lead, and maybe I can help them out. Now, it's a service that solicitor or that broker could then offer to their clients. If you've got a problem, I know somebody who is very, very good at coming up with property solutions, and they can put them onto you, and it makes their business seem so much stronger because their solutions that broker or that solicitor might not have been aware of, and you're coming up with ways of building their relationships with their clients. Surveyors as well. Surveyors are obviously in property. They go into a lot of properties. They have a lot of conversations about why a property is on the market, because most people will meet surveyors at the property when that property is going to be sold. So surveyors might also get access to the properties before they go on the market. So surveyors, solicitors, and any kind of brokers. Tell them what you're looking for. Tell them how you're different in the market. Big yourself up and tell them about the training that you've had, the facility, any lending facility that you've got access to, all of that kind of stuff, just to make yourself stand out from the crowd, to get those direct-to-vendor marketing leads coming into you, which gives you the opportunity to then convert those leads. Now, if those leads don't come through, that's okay. If those leads don't come off because they don't work out financially, that's okay. So long as those leads, so long as you've communicated as best you can with those 3 people, and you are at least following them up to continue the conversation with them, that's as much as you can do. And everybody should have leaflets in the car. Everybody, because I don't care where you are in the country, I don't care how posh your neighbourhood is, there are always going to be properties that have been empty for a little while, and they're in a state of disrepair, and you have no idea what the intention or what the owner is going to do with them. But they're definitely an opportunity. So all the other methods, everything else that I showed you before, all the other ways of communicating with people should be deployed to target specific situations. But these four that are on this page should be deployed by everyone. You should build up relationships with your solicitors, brokers, and surveyors, and not only for the standard way that they can help you, but also for ways that they can generate leads for you. So if it works, you understand how you can use these kinds of finance, because we've talked about these kinds of finance over the past 3 days. So I'm assuming that you've looked into how they differ, how the loan to values are different, and what the lending criteria for each one of those providers would be. And once you know that, you can put these kinds of finance together in order to facilitate the purchasing of the property, or in order to facilitate the solution that the owner of that property is looking for. And then going into the contracts as well, a lot of these contracts would be, and like I've said before, there are more contracts than the ones that I've got listed, but there are many, many contracts in property. What you need to do is use these contracts to your advantage. Now, the one that really sticks out for me on talking about this topic is our lease options and the power of lease options. If you were going to research one contract specifically, research lease options, because for direct to vendor leads, it gives you a phenomenal amount of power. It doesn't matter what size the property is, it gives you a phenomenal amount of power and control over that property. So you've looked at research, you've looked at finance, you've looked at contracts, you know how you can put these things together, and therefore the chances of you coming up with a solution for that person who you're direct to vendor with is so much stronger than it might previously have been. Now, before I go on to this slide, I just want to talk a little bit about how you handle that conversation with the owner. So let's say that you've sent leaflets out, and let's say that you've targeted negative equity. The way that you handle that direct to vendor lead is the same way that you handle any kind of lead that comes into you. It's all about human contact. You don't want to have a long email back and forth with that person. What you want to do is you want to get in front of them and you want to start a conversation with them. And the first part of that conversation should be all about building rapport with that person. And once you've built rapport, you then need to get into their situation. You need them to tell you everything, all the nitty-gritty about their situation, because it's only when you understand that nitty-gritty will you then be able to come up with the best fitting solution for their issue. And the better the fit, the more the chances they have of going with your solution and backing you for coming up with the option that will get them out of that situation. So with negative equity, it would be something like signing the property up on an option agreement, paying them a set amount of rent, and basically babysitting their mortgage, which means that they can then move out and they can move away or do whatever they're looking for. You know, only by building rapport with them and then asking them about the situation will they tell you that they want to take a job that's 50 miles away and they need to move house, but they're stuck because they're in negative equity. You need to go through that fact finding where you're just finding out exactly what their situation is. Now, when you do that, especially for the first couple, you might not be, that the solution for their problem might not come to you straight away. And so I don't think there's anything wrong at all with going into that fact find, meeting them in their house, finding out what their situation is. to say, you know what, I'm absolutely positive that I'm the right person to come up with this solution for you. I know I have the information that you need. However, what I want to do is I want to go away for 24 hours and I really want to give this some thought to make sure that the solution that I propose to you fits your situation perfectly. So it's 3 o'clock now. I'm using that as an example. It's 3 o'clock now. I will get back to you by 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. I've got your telephone number. I will give you a call by 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Because the way that I see that is it's an opportunity, not only to give them the certainty that you're going to come up with the best possible situation, the best solution for their situation, but also it then holds you accountable. Because if you're telling them and you're going to call them by 3 o'clock the next day, you had better call them by 3 o'clock the next day. Otherwise, what are you getting into this business for? If you're going to make somebody a promise that you're going to get back to them by 3 o'clock and then you're not going to deliver on the promise that you've made and the criteria that you've set. So fact finding is all about building rapport to start off with, because if you don't build rapport with somebody, they're never going to give you the nitty gritty information. So if I was going to go into somebody's house who'd called me, who'd dropped me a message because they're in negative equity and they need help, if I was going to go to their house, the first thing that I would do for the first 10 minutes would be just build rapport with them. Talk about their house, talk about their neighborhood, talk about their dog, their cats. You've got loads of stimulus in their house because it's their house. They filled it with their things. Have that conversation first and then get into the detail. Because once you've built rapport, and there's a million different ways of building rapport. If you've done any kind of NLP training, like I have, you'll understand how big this section is. And again, we could do a whole day on just building rapport with people. But do that for 10 minutes, build rapport, and then go into the fact find. So what we would do with our franchisees is they'd find the opportunity, they'd crunch the numbers, and then they'd send them over to us. And we do all of that within that first 24 hours. And within that 24 hours, before they go back to them with the solution, we'd have helped them find the best fitting solution for that problem. And at that case, they have a couple of options. They could buy it themselves if they can get the right numbers out of the person that owns the property, or they could sell the property on, or they could come up with a completely different solution for that owner in order to help them out. And it might not benefit them whatsoever, but they might have exactly the right solution that the owner wasn't aware of. And then they can pass the opportunity on to the marketing team if we're going to sell it, or we can pass it to the funding team if we're going to buy it. We have this, and we do this for all of our franchisees. We actually create below market value leads from a fast sale website for our franchisees. We have over 50 offices nationwide who have exclusive lending, access to exclusive lending, which again can mean that they can purchase those properties even quicker. And we have all kinds of development experience, all kinds of property experience, never mind just development experience. So we're part of a national brand, so we've created a lot of these marketing leaflets and information for our franchisees. They can go out to their territory of 40,000 households, or they can go outside of their territory, as long as there's not another franchisee there, in order to market, in order to find these deals, in order to put these leaflets through doors for properties that look like they're completely run down. And this is all stuff that we train in our week-long training course at the beginning of any franchise. And the reason that we train this stuff is because we've put it into practice before. We have experience of doing this. And we also have, like I said, the website, not only our main source.co website, but a different website that generates fast sale leads that the franchisees get the leads from as well. And we provide them with property leads and investor leads. The email campaign management, if we're going out to investors, but the national brand marketing, I feel like you know this by now. We've got the regional blog that we do for them and the access to the peer-to-peer platform, which we'll go through a little bit later in the week. Quarterly events, SIN, networking management, and of course those legal documents. We have templated contracts. Most of the contracts that we've got listed on the contract page, we have those templated the franchisees can use. So we make money when the franchisees make money. If you've got any questions today whatsoever about direct to vendor leads and building relationships with people who can provide you with direct to vendor leads, chris.kirkwood@source.co is the email address. Please drop me a message. 30 property leads in 5 days is the name of the Facebook group. You should have that on one of the emails that we sent out to you. Head over there, get in there, start the conversation. If you've got any questions whatsoever, please send them over to me. So this is from Monday, we did the online sourcing. On Tuesday, we did commercial conversions. Commercial conversions was a slightly shorter video, webinar, sorry, because you had quite a lot of homework to do on the commercial conversions, because you then had to go through all of those different websites and find out which geographically really work well for you. So you had a lot of homework yesterday. Direct to vendor, what you want to do is you want to, first of all, you want to be aware of what strategies you're employing in order to achieve those goals that you made on Monday using the goal setting template that we provide for you. Now, if you have got strategies where direct to vendor leads could apply, you've then from today got that list of all the different ways that you can go for direct to vendor leads. And now you've got different ways of achieving those direct to vendor leads and different ways of communicating with those leads. So have a look at that, see if it can apply to you. There are chances are it doesn't. There are chances are that working through agents is exactly the right way for you to do it. But if direct to vendor leads can supplement the leads that you're getting from agents, then they're a fantastic way to get access to the person who is making the decision about the property there and then, instead of going through an intermediary. So I hope that today's been a good webinar. It's Wednesday today, so we're halfway through the week now. Look out tomorrow for the webinar that we're going to do, and I hope you've got a decent amount of leads already. If you've got any questions, hop over to the group and I will see you over there. Thanks for your time today. Have a great day.